In July 1943, when Operation Zitadelle, the final ambitious German offensive at the Kursk salient, was halted by the dense and elite defenses of the Soviet Red Army, the tide began to turn. After many bloody days of holding back the Germans within their steel wall, the Soviet Red Army began a counterattack with unprecedented force. In this Part 5, we enter an explosive phase. The Red Army officially shifts from defense to offense, beginning with two large-scale pivotal campaigns of the entire war. The Kutuzov campaign, a steel blow against the German Central Army at Orel, marking the beginning of a series of counteroffensives. The Belgorod-Kharkov campaign, a lightning-fast battle that forced the German army into a retreat and completely ended any ambition to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. This was not only a turning point in the Battle of Kursk, but also the beginning of a total counteroffensive that pushed Nazi Germany out of Soviet territory. Join Past Uncovered as we step into this glorious period, where history shifted from defense to offense, where the Soviet Red Army etched its name in the golden pages of world history for its courage, tenacity, fierce fighting spirit, and unwavering determination. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share the video to spread these heroic historical stories. While in the early stages of the Battle of Kursk, German tanks only had to fight against T-34 medium tanks. They now faced equally heavy opponents from the Soviet Union. In terms of firepower, the German Tiger the Furs, with its 88mm L-56 gun, was superior to the Soviet KV-85 IS-1 with its 85mm L-52 gun. But in terms of armor, the Soviet KV-85 IS-1 was superior. In terms of firepower, the German Tiger I with its 80mm L-56 gun was superior to the Soviet KV-85 IS-1 with its 85mm L-52 gun. But in terms of armor, the Soviet KV-85 IS-1 was superior. The KV-85 IS-1 tanks successively destroyed German Tiger I tanks with their 85mm long-barreled cannons, firing UPR-365P Sabot rounds from a distance of nearly 1,000 meters. At a similar range, the Tiger I's 88mm gun was powerless against the 160mm thick frontal armor of these tanks. On the night of July 12th, the remnants of the German tank divisions retreated. According to British estimates, the Nazi German army lost 320 tanks and self-propelled guns, while the Soviet army lost about 400. The Soviet side gave the opposite result, stating that the Soviet army lost 300 tanks and self-propelled guns, but destroyed 400 tanks and self-propelled guns, 88 artillery pieces, 70 mortars, and more than 300 enemy military vehicles. The German side did not give an overall loss figure, but acknowledged that the attack had completely failed. Not only did the Nazi German army suffer heavy losses in weapons and soldiers, but it also lost a high-ranking commanding officer. On the morning of July 13th, during a retreat, Lieutenant General Walter von Hunersdorf, commander of the 6th Tank Division, German, sustained a minor wound from submachine gun fire. On the afternoon of August 13th, the 6th Tank Division was bombed by the Soviet Air Force. Walter von Hunersdorf suffered a severe head injury and was taken to a hospital in Kharkiv for treatment, but he did not survive and died on July 17, 1943. The Soviet Army's counteroffensive overview. While the Nazi German army faced numerous difficulties in transporting supplies to the front lines during the Kursk campaign, the Soviet army received abundant reinforcements from its rear. The railway provided the Bryansk front with 3 military transport routes with 60 pairs of trains per day. The Central Front with 4 routes with 66 pairs of trains per day, and the Voronezh and Steppe fronts with 6 routes, 3 shared with the Southwestern Front, regularly supplied by 56 to 64 pairs of trains per day. Therefore, during the counteroffensive, Soviet troops on the fronts opposite and around the Kursk area were reinforced. The counteroffensive plan in the Kursk salient had been planned by the Soviet Supreme Command and the commanders of the fronts before the Nazi German offensive began, and now they only needed to adjust the details to suit the new situation. On the northern flank, immediately after the Central Front broke the offensive of the German Army Group Center on July 10th, on July 11th, the Bryansk Front, and the left wing of the Western Front launched Operation Kutuzov, attacking north of Oryol. On July 13th, the Central Front also launched Operation Orlovsky south of Oryol to eliminate the Oryol-Mtsensk gap. On the southern flank, the Voronezh Front and the Steppe Front continued their counterattack until July 23rd, pushing Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's divisions back to their starting lines and launching a full-scale counterattack with Operation Commander-in-Chief Rumyantsev, liberating Kharkiv and advancing more than 200 kilometers westward. On the Oryol-Bryansk Front, the Soviet army mobilized the Central Front, the Bryansk Front commanded by General M. Popov, and the left wing of the Western Front, commanded by General Vasily Danilovich Sokolovsky, to launch a concentrated attack on the center of the Nazi German defenses at Oryol. After a month, they pushed the Nazi Germans back to the Lyudinovo, Zhizdra, Prokhorovka, and Dmitrovsk-Orlovsky lines, straightening the front line and eliminating the Oryol Depression, which the Germans called the Oryol-Mtsensk Iron Wedge. In the south, the Steppe Front, commanded by General I.S. Konev, a large reserve force of the Soviet army tasked with defending the second echelon, was deployed to the front line, along with the Voronezh Front and the left wing of the Southwestern Front, commanded by General R.Ya. Malinovsky, launching a simultaneous counteroffensive against the 4th Tank Army and the Kempf Group, German, advancing to the Sumy, Lebedino, Gadyak, Zenkov, Akhtirka, Konstantinovka lines, north of Lyubotin and Chuguyev. The Soviet counteroffensive phase ended with the recapture of the city of Kharkov for the second and final time on August 23rd. On the Oryol-Bryansk direction, the results of the early offensive from July 12 to 19 by the Bryansk Front and the left wing of the Western Front pushed the 2nd and 9th Tank Armies, German, in the Mtsensk-Oryol area into a defensive position from the north and south. The attack of the 11th Guards Army, advancing along the narrow corridor between the Vitebet and Resety rivers, reaching Ilyanskoye, 35-kilometer northeast of the Karachev Junction, placed the German forces defending the Bolkhov-Oryol-Mtsensk-Zmyevka area in a semi-encircled position. On July 17th, the 50th Army also launched an attack on the Dumanichi area, capturing a 5-kilometer wide and 2-kilometer deep bridgehead south of the Zhizdra River. Within the Central Front's offensive belt, the 13th, 48th, 70th Armies and the 2nd Tank Army had also hastily completed preparations for Operation Orlovsky. On July 15th, the 2nd Tank Army and the 13th Army began their offensive along the Oka River toward Kromy. The 48th Army surrounded the German defensive positions at Zmyevka and advanced to Filosofovo and Nikolskoye. Although the German tank divisions suffered heavy losses in the preceding offensive, the remaining units stubbornly held on to the Mtsensk defenses like an iron wedge, cutting off the Bryansk front and preventing it from advancing toward Oryol. The attack by the 11th Guards Army Western Front was also halted along the Olesnya River. The 48th Army surrounded the German defensive positions at Zmyevka and advanced to Filosofovo and Nikolskoye. Although the German tank divisions suffered heavy losses in the preceding offensive, the remaining units stubbornly held onto the Mtsensk defenses like an iron wedge, cutting off the Bryansk front and preventing it from advancing toward Oryol. The attack by the 11th Guards Army Western Front was also halted along the Olesnya River. To bolster the offensive power of the Bryansk Front, the Soviet High Command deployed the 3rd Guards Tank Army, commanded by Lieutenant General P.S. Rybalko, comprising 37,266 officers and soldiers, equipped with 475 T-34 and T-70 tanks from the reserve forces attached to the front. The Soviet General Staff warned Front Commander M. Popov that deploying this tank army in the complex streets of Oryol could kill it, and assisted the front staff in planning its deployment. At 10:20 a.m. on July 19th, from the Novosil-Mukovoy line, General P.S. Rybalko organized 2 tank wings in coordination with infantry to attack Oryol.
Cánh
The
trái
right
của phương
wing
diện quân
consisted of the
Bryansk
6th
có quân đoàn
Guards
xe
Tank
tăng cận
Corps,
vệ 7,
formerly the
tên cũ
12th
là
Tank
quân đoàn
Corps,
xe tăng
in the 1st
15
echelon,
ở thế đội
the
1,
7th Guards
lữ đoàn xe
Mechanized
tăng
Corps in the
91
2nd
ở thế đội
echelon,
2 làm chủ lực
coordinating with
phối
the
hợp với
3rd
tập đoàn
Army
quân
to
63
attack Oriel
tấn
from the
công song song với
northeast.
con đường sắt
A tank brigade of the
Livly-Orion
7th Guards
ở phía đông
Mechanized
nam
Corps
đánh vào
supported the
thành
left
phố.
wing of the 3rd Army, attacking Medsensk from the south. The left wing of the Bryansk front had the 7th Guards Tank Corps, formerly the 15th Tank Corps, in the 1st echelon. The 91st Tank Brigade in the 2nd echelon formed the main force, coordinating with the 63rd Army Group to attack
Bộ
parallel
tư
to the
lệnh cùng tập đoàn
Livny-Oriel
quân trung
Railway,
tâm Đức không
assaulting
hề
the
biết
city
đến
from
việc
the
tập đoàn quân xe
southeast.
tăng cận vệ 3 Liên
The
Xô
German
đã
Central
được
Army
điều
Group
động đến
Command
hướng
was
này,
completely
còn các sư
unaware
đoàn
that the
xe tăng
Soviet
2 và
3rd
18
Guards
của Đức
Tank Army had
cũng
been
hoàn toàn bị
deployed
bất
in this
ngờ
direction.
khi họ giải quân dọc
The
theo con
German
đường sắt
2nd
này,
and 18th
nhưng cả
Tank
hai cánh quân
Divisions
xe
were
tăng của
also
tập đoàn quân
completely
3
surprised
Liên
when,
Xô đã không
despite
sử dụng
deploying
nó.
troops along
Tập
the
đoàn quân
railway,
không quân 6 của
neither
Đức
of the
tung
Soviet
ra mỗi
3rd
ngày
Tank
hơn 500
Army's
phi
tank
vụ máy
wings
bay cường
utilized
kích,
it.
gây thiệt hại không
The
nhỏ
German
về xe
2nd
tăng
and
cho
18th
tập đoàn
Tank
quân cận vệ
Divisions were
3,
also
làm chậm
completely
tốc độ tấn
surprised
công của
when,
quân đội Liên Xô
despite
xuống
deploying
chỉ còn
troops
trung
along the
bình 4
railway,
km trên ngày.
neither of the Soviet 3rd
Nhưng
Tank
không quân
Army's
Đức
tank
cũng không
wings
cứu được vùng
utilized
cứ
it.
điểm
The German 6th
bị
Air
nửa
Army
hợp
launched
vây.
over
Quân đoàn
500
bộ binh
airstrike
35
missions
Đức
daily,
phải rút khỏi
inflicting significant
ngày
tank
21 tháng
damage on
7
the 3rd
về giữ
Guards Tank
Orion.
Army, and
Ngày
slowing
22
the
tháng 7,
Soviet advance to an
quân đoàn
average
xe
of
tăng
only
cận
4
vệ 7
km per
cắt đứt
day.
con đường sắt
However, the German Air
Orion
Force could
tại
not save the
Kamenevo
Metsensk stronghold.
ngày 22 tháng 7.
Half
Khi
encircled,
đã tiếp cận
the
ngoại
German
vi
35th
Orion,
Infantry
tập đoàn quân
Corps
xe
had
tăng
to
3
withdraw
được lệnh
from
quay xuống
Metsensk
phía
on
nam
July
phối hợp với tập
21st
đoàn quân xe
to
tăng 2
defend Oriol.
công kích tuyến phòng thủ
On July 23rd, the
Anmarovo
7th Guards
của
Tank
quân Đức
Corps
dọc
cut the
theo tuyến
Metsensk
sông
Oriol
Oka.
Railway at
Vì thiếu xe tăng
Kamenevo.
đột kích nên
On
mặc dù
July
đã tiếp cận ngoại
22nd,
vi
having
Orion
approached
từ
the
ngày 1
outskirts of
tháng 8,
Oriol,
nhưng
the
phải đến
3rd
ngày
Tank
5
Army
tháng
was
8,
ordered to turn
tập đoàn quân
south to
3 của
coordinate
tướng
with the
của
2nd
Bartok
Tank
mới đánh
Army
chiếm được
in
thành phố
attacking the
Orion
German Kromi
tối mùng
Almazovo
5 tháng.
defensive line along the Oka River. Due to a lack of assault tanks, although they had approached the outskirts of Oriol by August 1st, General Gorbatov's 3rd Army did not capture the city until August 5th. On the evening of August 5th, Moscow fired fireworks to celebrate the liberation of Oriol, beginning a regular celebratory ceremony whenever Soviet troops liberated a major city or broke through a key defensive line of the Nazi German army. This ceremony continued until the end of the war. On the northernmost flank, the 11th Guards Army and the 50th Army of the Western Front resumed their offensive on July 23rd. The 50th Army advanced another 10 kilometers, closing in on the towns of Shtigry and Lovat. The 11th Army expanded the Ilyevskoye bridgehead, now only 15 kilometers north of the Karachev railway junction. On July 24th, these two armies were transferred to the Bryansk front. In the south, the 3rd Guards Tank Army, transferred to the Central Front, coordinated with the 2nd Tank Army to capture Kromi, breaking through the defenses of the 2nd Tank Army, German, and by August 11th had advanced to the Shablikino-Kucheryevka-Dmitrovsky, Orlovsk line. In the middle of the front after capturing Oriol, the 3rd, 61st, and 63rd Armies continued to pursue the corps of the 9th Army, German, and by August 18th had advanced another 70 kilometers west. On August 20th, the Bryansk front and the 13th and 70th Armies continued their offensive, capturing Kucheryevka, Dmitrovsky-Orlovsk, Karachev, Belye-Berega, Zhurinichi, and Zhizdra, advancing another 20 kilometers westward, but halting before the Hagen line on August 23rd, with significant losses. During the first half of August, the Nazi German Army reinforced the Central Army Group, with 6 divisions withdrawn from the Northern Army Group. On August 16th, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge was dismissed. General Walter Model was appointed commander of Army Group Center. He boldly withdrew from positions threatened by Soviet forces and regrouped to establish a solid defensive line from Lyudinovo through Prokhorovka, 20 kilometers east of Bryansk, and extending south to Komarichi, also known as the Hagen Line. By protecting the strategic railway line from Konotop through Navlia, Bryansk, Dyatkovo to Lyudinovo. Running parallel to the front, General Walter Model was able to mobilize tank forces along the entire line and halt Soviet attacks in this direction. On the Belgorod-Kharkov front, compared to the Central Front and the Bryansk front, the Voronezh front suffered the most losses in the defensive battles from July 5th to July 23rd, 1.5 times the defensive time of the two aforementioned fronts. The casualties and material losses were also greater: 27,542 dead, 46,530 wounded, and over 700 tanks damaged or destroyed. This front needs time to replenish its personnel and equipment to restore its units, including approximately 500 tanks needed to restore its armored and mechanized corps. On July 25th, the Soviet High Command moved the 27th and 53rd Armies from the steppe front to the area south of the Kursk salient. More than 600 tanks were supplied to restore the 2nd, 18th, and 29th Tank Corps, the 2nd and 5th Guards Tank Corps, and the 3rd Mechanized Corps. On the other hand, this was also the direction in which the Nazi German army achieved the greatest breakthrough depth, up to 48 kilometers in the entire operation. Moving the steppe front from a defensive depth of 150 to 300 km to the front line also took weeks due to the heavily damaged railway lines. Therefore, while the Bryansk and Central fronts had been counterattacking since July 12th, it was not until July 23rd, when the last divisions of the German Army Group South had withdrawn deep around Kharkiv, that the Southwestern Front and the Steppe Front began their counterattack and had to develop a new counterattack plan to replace the failed plan of July. Furthermore, because the Voronezh Front had suffered considerable losses in manpower and equipment during the defensive phase of the operation, the Soviet High Command mobilized the right wing of the Southwestern Front to participate in the counteroffensive on the Belgorod-Kharkov front. The operation was given the code name Marshal Rumyantsev. On July 23rd, the Southwestern Front restored the front line that had been in place since July 5th and had to halt until July 30th, when the Steppe Front had completed the assembly of tank and infantry units and moved air forces and logistical bases to the front. After 3 days of artillery deployment and battlefield reconnaissance, the counteroffensive began on the Belgorod direction on August 3rd. At 5 a.m., Soviet artillery launched a continuous 3-hour bombardment of the German 3rd Tank Corps and 11th Infantry Corps around the Belgorod-Borisovka-Tomarovka defensive complex. Over 450 IL-2 air raids and PE-2 bomber sorties were carried out by the Soviet 2nd and 5th Air Armies over a narrow area with a radius of only 5 kilometers around Belgorod. At 8:12 a.m., as artillery shifted its fire to penetrate the supply lines connecting Belgorod with Kharkov and the southern defensive areas, the Soviet 1st and 5th Tank Armies launched their attack. The 1st Tank Army's offensive spearhead originated from Leptovka, advancing along the Lgov-Zolochev Railway to encircle the Borisovka and Tomarovka defensive positions of the German 3rd Tank Corps. The 5th Guards Tank Army's assault force then penetrated the junction between the German 3rd Tank Corps and 11th Infantry Corps, creating a 15 kilometers wide, 55 kilometer deep corridor that severed the two corps. On the Belgorod front, the 7th and 69th Guards Armies attacked Belgorod from the north and east. By the afternoon of August 5th, Belgorod was in the hands of the Soviet Army. The 11th German Army was pushed back to the south. On the evening of August 5th, the 3rd German Tank Army abandoned the Borisovka and Tomarovka positions and withdrew to establish a new defensive line at Bogodukov. On the right flank, the 40th Soviet Army, from the Soldatskoye area, captured Dorogozhsk on August 6th and directed its attack towards the city of Graveron. The 47th Army captured Krasnopolye on August 7th and advanced eastward to Boromlia. Belgorod was considered a defensive outpost for Kharkiv from the north. Therefore, the loss of Belgorod left Kharkiv completely exposed in the north and dealt a heavy blow to Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's North Donets River line. On August 8th, the 57th Army, transferred from the southwestern front to the Voronezh front, crossed the North Donets River north of Martove, launching an attack on Kharkiv from the east. The German 42nd Infantry Corps was pushed off the river line and retreated to hold the second defensive line from Lipsy to Chuguyev. To advance the attack on August 10th, the 6th and 53rd Guards Armies were deployed. The 6th Guards Army Corps coordinated with the 1st Tank Army, and the 53rd Army Corps coordinated with the 5th Guards Tank Army Corps. On August 11th, the 1st Tank Army and the 6th Guards Army launched an assault on Bogodukov and captured the city. the 5th Guards Tank Army from Zolochev and the 53rd Army from Kazachia Lopan advanced along the Belgorod-Kharkov Railway, and by August 15th had captured the Dergachi station, more than 13 kilometers north of Kharkiv. Northeast of Kharkiv, the 7th Guards Army and the 69th Army broke through the defenses of the 42nd Corps, German, capturing the towns of Liptsi and Ternavaya, and also reached Sirkuni, 10 kilometers from Kharkiv, on August 16th. On the same day, the 57th Army also approached the outskirts of Kharkiv from the west. Also on August 15th, the 47th Army, together with the 4th Guards Army, surrounded and destroyed most of the German 52nd Corps in the area east of Trostyanets. On August 16th, the 47th Army advanced along the Vorskla River corridor, attacking and capturing Aktyrka and penetrating deep into Kotelva. On August 16th, General Hermann Hoth concentrated the Grossdeutschland Mechanized Division, along with the 11th and 17th Tank Divisions, to launch a counterattack from the area between Trostyanets and Aktyrka behind the 47th Army, recapturing Aktyrka. On August 18th, the 6th Guards Army was forced to launch an early offensive along the Merla River, capturing Krasnokutsk on August 20th and repelling the counterattack of German tank and mechanized divisions. On the same day, the 47th Army encountered a counterattack from the German 19th and 13th Tank Divisions at Kotelva, forcing a retreat to the defensive line of the 4th Guards Army with heavy losses. On the Kharkiv front on August 17th, the 1st Tank Army also launched an assault from Bogodukov towards the city of Valkyrie with the intention of capturing Marifa and isolating Kharkiv from the south. However, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein prevented the Soviet army from carrying out its plan. The SS Viking Mechanized Division, the SS Das Reich Tank Division, and the 14th Tank Division from the German reserves reinforced the 4th Tank Army, halting the advance of the 1st Tank Army Soviet Union in the Lyubotin-Valky area. The Voronezh Front Command requested Lieutenant General G.I. Kulik to immediately send infantry of the 4th Guards Army to support the tanks of the 1st Tank Army, but Kulik acted too slowly, allowing 4 German tank and infantry divisions to inflict heavy losses on 6 tank brigades under Katukov, forcing the 1st Tank Army to retreat to Olshany with significant casualties and tank Dyamgre. During the attack starting on July 23rd, although their forces were largely undamaged, the 4th Guards Army consistently lagged behind, leaving the 47th Army and the 1st Tank Army on their right and left flanks frequently exposed. Due to poor command, General Kulik was dismissed. Lieutenant General A.I. Zigan was appointed as his replacement. Dear friends, although the Soviet Army achieved significant victories after shifting from defense to offense, liberating the cities of Oryol, Belgorod, and a number of other strategic areas, the road to regaining the initiative was still not entirely smooth. The lack of seamless coordination between the army groups, coupled with difficulties in communication, logistics, and command on the vast battlefield, left fatal gaps in the flanks of the attacking formation. And it was these gaps that the Germans exploited to the fullest to counterattack, especially in the counterattack at Kharkov, inflicting heavy losses on the Red Army immediately after a series of resounding victories. Part 5 concludes not only with red flags flying over newly liberated cities, but also with a strategic wake-up call. Victory in modern warfare lies not only in strength or spirit, but also in coordination, precision, and the ability to learn from mistakes in the midst of battle.